Hi, thanks for visiting the channel. I hope this video has found you in good spirits and in good health. This is the introduction to our How to Be a Mechanic series. We want to put out the information it takes for a good mechanic to become a great mechanic. So you could either use the next 40 years of your life figuring all this stuff out on your own.
Keep dreaming.
Or you could just watch these videos. Okay, so let's get started. So you have to ask yourself a question. Do you really want to be an automotive mechanic? I know it looks cool, it looks fun, all that stuff, but there's a really steep learning curve. For the first few years, it's going to feel like you do nothing but screw anything up. Also, at times, it can be strenuous, confusing. It's like putting together a giant jigsaw puzzle in many cases, where the first steps are to find the edges of the jigsaw puzzle so you can start filling out the middle. And when you begin, you don't even know what the edge looks like in this particular kind of puzzle. So that's why you need somebody to guide you. So in the old days, back in the 50s and 60s, they used to have mechanics that would work on stuff just like carburetors, distributors, points, condensers, that kind of thing, adjusting valves. And those things are all gone now. They're replaced with computers. So the technology started creeping in to the cars in, say, 1970s or so, and it hasn't stopped creeping yet. I mean, the last count, the last cars that I've seen have probably 35 different computer modules in them that all talk over CAN bus lines and LIN bus lines and infotainment bus lines and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot to learn. You don't have to learn it all on day one. I mean, you start with the basics and all that kind of stuff, but as you progress, you're going to have to learn how these systems work with each other and how to troubleshoot and figure out which one is bad. When I was in high school, I was only interested in fast cars. That was it. I had no interest in making my English skills better, higher math. I had no interest in any of that stuff. I just wanted to get into cars and get started on my career because I knew I was going to be a mechanic. But I tested well. I'm a fairly intelligent person. I tested well, so the guidance counselors wouldn't let me go across the street, literally right across the street from the high school where I was, to go to the VOTEC program. And I could see the guys out my English class window working on cars, pulling motors, pressure washing things. I mean, I was practically licking the windows to try to get over there. But no, they wouldn't let me go because the guidance counselors, because of my scores, they would not let me go over there. They would get in trouble. So yeah, so the only people they would let to go over there were people like Gomer and Goober Pyle from Mayberry, you know. So I blame them from keeping people with things on the ball from going into the industry and getting trained at an early level. So that kind of attitude basically has put us where we are now, where in the United States we have an 800,000 mechanic shortage. So there's 800,000 positions open for mechanics and 800,000 mechanics missing not to fill those positions. So at some point, I dropped out of high school so I could go be a mechanic. So I joined the Army. And I got my GED in the Army while I was in Germany. So I've got a Georgia high school diploma through the GED program there. And yeah, so that's how I became a mechanic. Now, what made me want to become a mechanic? Well, the reason I became interested in cars and wanted to be a mechanic was because my dad was a mechanic and I wanted to be near him. So back in the 70s, he was a Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche mechanic, and he worked at a dealership in Savannah. It was Bill Usry Motors. And every Friday, my mother would go and pick up my father's paycheck. While we were there, of course, I wanted to go into the big service bay where all the cars and lifts were. So, I mean, you should have seen it. It was amazing. All these late 60s, early 70s bugs and buses and Type 3s and Gias and all that stuff, all on lifts, all in different states of disassembly. You had motors on stands, you had cylinder heads laying around, you know, and being rebuilt. Just all the stuff and the smells. You know, the whole place just smelled like oil. And some people would find that appalling, but this is my early imprinting years. So the smells of horsehair upholstery and oil and grease and gasoline and the carburetor lye, the carburetor dip stuff. I mean, that just imprinted on me. So all the sights and sounds and everything. So one of the things that really got me was when the cars were up in the air, I would walk over and I would turn the tires. I would spin the tires with my hand. You know, on the front tires it was easy, but the back tires, not so easy. And when I turned the back tire, the other tire on that same axle would go the opposite way. So yeah, that was a mystery that I felt like I had to solve. So I was hooked. I mean, absolutely, I was hooked. So it was basically a toddler's fantasy that I would go and work at that dealership with my father. Of course, it never happened. You know, Dad ended up working at about 10 different dealerships over the course of his 40 or 50 year career. And he also worked for an aircraft manufacturer, 2 of them. But yeah, he told me all kind of stories about when I was in grade school and, you know, junior high and all that kind of stuff. One of them was that, one time we were in Wichita when he worked for Boeing. He would also work for the local place there. One night we got a call for him to come get his toolbox at like 3 in the morning, and the dealership was burning down. So he had to go and roll his toolbox out of the dealership while the other side of it was down. And the whole place just burnt to the ground. And it was the middle of February in Wichita. So, I mean, at the end of the firefighting, the whole place was covered in, it was like a glacier because all the water froze. It was crazy. Another one he worked at when he first got to Wichita, he was working at some kind of Toyota Volvo dealer, and he had a really good rapport with the owner. The owner hired him personally because he was a master mechanic, and he had a good reputation, and he could turn the work. So he was the highest earner at that dealership, including the salesman, general manager, whatever. My dad could turn the labor. He could turn them. And of course, he was also teaching people. So he had taught a lot of guys there all these techniques and strategies on how to get the work done faster and have it stay fixed. And he taught these guys a lot of skills they didn't have when he got there. So he basically raised the level of the entire shop. So when this guy decided to retire, he left his kid in charge and turned the dealership over to his kid. And of course, his kid had the brilliant idea of going and renegotiating my dad's salary, because he didn't want him making more than anybody else at the dealership. Mechanics shouldn't make more than that. So of course, those negotiations did not go well for him, because my dad decided that he was not going to take a haircut and pay, and he went to go work for the guy's competition for even more money. So my dad was also an aviation mechanic. There's the skills he learned in Vietnam. He worked for Grumman in Savannah, and he worked for Boeing out in Wichita. And he really had it going on. So when, you know, Boeing is a union shop. I don't know if Grumman was at the time or whatever, but when Boeing would have their union go on strike, and everybody took a haircut, everybody just went home, and maybe the union paid them a couple of wages to stay home or whatever. It was not nearly what they would make on the job. So what Dad would do is he wouldn't cross the union lines. Of course, he's a union member. What he would do instead is he'd pick up the phone and he would call the local dealership and see if they needed him. And of course, they always did, because he was a master and he could turn the hours. So he would just roll his toolbox in there until the duration of the strike was over, and then roll his toolbox back home. He had never missed a paycheck. So he really was a wise fellow that way. So he was a master of Volkswagen, Audi, and Porsche mechanic, and an experienced A&P aviation mechanic. He served in as a shop foreman almost any place he went. So, you know, he could fix anything. So it just reminds me of a story. One of the things that really made me want to be a mechanic, really set my hooks into it. So one time in the 90s, I just got out of the Army. I was in there for 3 years as a tank mechanic. And I had just gotten out, and I was working at the local Acura dealership. And one of my coworkers there, Michael, wanted me to replace the top on his 79 Beetle. And, you know, my dad was visiting my aunt. So the plan was for me to drive to my aunt's with the car, with all the materials for replacing the top. We do the top of the weekend, we drive back. Well, what a fiasco. I drove the car there, and I got about 3/4 of the way to Hilton Head from Savannah, and the car started to sputter and buck and do all kind of crazy stuff. So I didn't know anything about the Volkswagens at the time. I'd owned a few, but I hadn't gone through any of the training to figure out how to work on them and fix them. So yeah, the thing, it died on me. So this was before cell phones. This was 1990 somewhere. And so I had to walk a couple miles to a payphone and call my aunt, and you know, she told my dad that I was stranded, so he came and got me. So I'm sitting there for 30 minutes in this car, just dreading all the money I'm going to have to spend to get this guy's car fixed, because he's never going to believe that I didn't tear his car up. He's never going to believe it. I mean, the car was fine when I picked it up. It's got to be fine when I drop it off. So I'm just sitting there, oh my gosh, so trying to figure out how we're going to tow. Are we going to flat pull this car with a strap or something like that? So Dad rolls up, and I start talking about how we're going to tow it, and he just says, no, we're not towing the car. I'm like, crap, what are we going to do? So he starts asking me how the car was working, running. I was, well, it was running fine, and it started skipping and bucking, and Eventually it shut off. He said, okay. So he went to the back of the car and raised the deck lid and looked around, poked around for a little bit, and then proudly and confidently announced, your points are closed up. And I said, this is a fuel injected car. How does it have points? And he said, well, they had to come up with a fuel injection for emission purposes, so Bosch provided that, but Volkswagen didn't have a good electronic ignition at the time that they could field, so that everything got points in condenser. My mind was blown. So anyway, I go back there and watch him, and within 2 minutes, he'd had the points out of the distributor, cleaned them with a file, put them back in, lubricated the shaft, adjusted the points with a set of feeler gauges, and put everything back together and told me to start it. And I was like, yeah, okay. So I go and start it, boom, light up. Man, I was just floored. I was so relieved, but I was also so very skeptical that somebody in less than 5 minutes could fix a car that seemed like it had burnt the motor up, and yeah. So I was a fresh mechanic. I thought I had some experience, but it turns out I didn't. So anyway, so he was already putting his toolbox in the trunk of his Dasher and told me that he'd follow me and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it seemed serious, but it wasn't. So the car drove great, and I realized just how far behind I was on my journey to be a master mechanic. And I was so far behind in experience and understand the different systems that are in cars. So it was on that day that I made up my mind that I was going to learn everything that I could possibly learn in the automotive trade until it was literally leaking out of my ears. Eventually, Dad and I started our shop on Hilton Head. We started up to do mostly upholstery, but the mechanical requests just kept coming in. So eventually we did very little upholstery and a lot of mechanical repairs, engine overhauls, all kinds of troubleshooting, brakes, tune-ups. I think Dad even, he was transmission certified at the dealer level, so he would even do transmission work right there. We had a little 2-bay shop. When I say 2-bay shop, 2 bays is all we had. We didn't have an office, we didn't have a bathroom. It was 2 rented bays in a storage center, and yeah, it was tight. And we were, at first we were working without lifts. We were just jacking everything up, pulling engines and transmissions and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was tight. So we worked together for about 7 years, and then that time we had rented another place. We grew to the point where we had another place. We had 2 lifts. We had probably, I don't know, 2,500 square feet. There was enough room in that one giant bay for us to have like an office and everything. So I mean, it was all going well. All of our inventory was on hooks on the wall, so we had made racks all the way up on 15, 20-foot walls. So we had ladders. We would go and we would pull things off of pegs. So everything was either pegboard or just screwed directly to a 2x4. So I mean, the whole place, it looked like some kind of Hispanic tienda that you would find, if you go abroad. It was pretty cool, but we didn't get along after a while. He was teaching me. He was my mentor, and I was his apprentice. And I walked into the situation, trying to impress him with what I knew already, and that's a bad situation. You don't want to try to impress the master mechanic. It's going to depress them, and it's going to basically pull everybody off the script that's supposed to happen. So when you go in, don't try to impress any. If you go into being a mechanic and you want to go into an apprenticeship program, they may try to evaluate you, what you know, but don't try to continually impress them. Impress them, but don't let on that you're trying to impress them, because they've paid their dues. They've seen some amazing things, and if they encourage you, great, but don't go in there trying to bust the place wide open. You're going to be their best mechanic, because it's not going to happen right away. Let me see, what else? So during my apprenticeship, I tested my father's patience by constantly trying to impress him, and of course he determined he was not going to be impressed. So when I left, though, we had some really great training, and I left as a solid journeyman level mechanic. And then after I left, of course, I learned even more on my own. But my father was always there. He was always only a phone call away for guidance, somebody to vent to, bounce ideas off of, and somebody who could understand and appreciate the struggles. Oh, my nose is so itchy. The struggles and hard-won successes that we mechanics go through, what we endure and what we achieve. So about 3 years ago, Dad passed, and I miss him dearly. And his name was Norman. So this series is dedicated to my father, Norman. I'm his legacy. as is everything he taught me. And I'm glad to share it with you in the series, just as he would have. So if you're of legal age and you imbibe in adult beverages, sometime raise a glass high and shout to Norm. He would have liked that. And let's remember him fondly, because without him, we wouldn't be doing this series. So enjoy the series, and please pay attention, because there will be a test on this material for the rest of your mechanical career.
We tend to blame others for our troubles. It's true that we make most of our own. Your situation in life depends on your choices, not who your parents are, not how wealthy they were. We're all born broken, ignorant, even with every advantage. A real head start in life, lose it all with one bad choice. Like rob a bank, drive drunk, go into debt, trying drugs, street racing, eat too much, start gambling, marry a loon. Drop out of school, join a cult, threaten the president, punch a cop 'cause you're mad, or visit North Korea. You're growing